detasseled. Each ear of detasseled corn had to be fertilized by a tiny grain of pollen floating on the air to the corn silk, sticking out the end of every ear of corn wrapped in its husk of green. Each kernel on the cob was fertilized by the grain of pollen growing down the corn silk to the kernel. The resulting kernels of corn then would carry the characteristics of each parent, much like in humans except for the tassels and corn silk business.
This is called silk right here at the end of the ear, and each one of those little silks are connected to a seed or a kernel, because you pull the corn husk back right here, and it looks like there's more silk at the top of the ear than at the bottom, because each one ends at each kernel. If you looked at them under a microscope, they're actually hollow little tubes. They're used for pollination. Another little bit of trivia about corn is next time you have that ear of sweet corn, before you eat it, count the number of rows on it, or kernels, because there will always be an even number of kernels on a row of corn. We'll start with this one right here with the yellow kernel, and it will be an even number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. There will always be an even number, not necessarily 16 kernels. There can be anywhere from 14 to up to 22 rows per cob.
Tell us about detasseling, who you worked for, and why did you do detasseling?
Well, that was like the only job you could get when you were 14 years old besides babysitting. And I think we got like $1.20 an hour or something. And it was for case PAG. And we do some in Naperville, but sometimes we get in the back of the big trucks and go down to Kankakee and detassel corn down there. And so it was early in the morning, and the dew was on the corn, and the thistles were rubbing up against your legs. Of course, you wouldn't wear pants because you'd have to get a tan, and it was hot. So.
And how many kids were there doing this?
Usually, it seems like there was like 35 or 40, something like that.
Any guys?
They were in a separate. They did the roguing, where they would. What did you
come by and hog the corn right out from the base.
Oh.
And they had machines, and we used to walk, and you can see the tassels right on the top of the corn there. We'd actually pluck the tassels off. Heck, I don't know, let's go pluck a couple.
Now, there he just did it. We just saw a tassel detasseler at work. We're out in a big 450-acre cornfield owned by Monsanto, and I've got an old farm type here, Dave Wisbrook. And Dave, tell us something about the corn as you know it, about hybrid corn and all that kind of thing.
Today it's all single cross corn, they call it.
Okay, now single cross means?
Well, I think it's only crossed once before the commercial guys get it, the farmers get it to grow it.
All right.
So
back in the 30s, when I was farming, that was before your time?
Yeah, that was probably open pollinated. Yeah.
It was open pollinated.
Yeah, and then they started with the seed corn sometime in the 30s. I don't know for sure.
Right.
And
then so the hybrid corn was.
Well, they called it then a 7-way cross.
Now what's a 7-way cross?
Well, they had to breed it 7 times to get it up to where they wanted it for commercial growers.
Okay.
But nowadays they just do it as single cross. I think it's one breeding, and then the commercial guys grow it.
Right. Now, do you still grow corn?
I don't. My son does. I'm retired. My son does. Yeah.
You look pretty young to be retired.
Well, thank you.
That's the way farmers do, though, right?
Right.
Okay.
Bought the first, traded in some horses and got a picker.
2-row?
2-row.
You traded in some horses?
Yeah.
You mean the
Slip Long and Lyle.
Slip Long and Lyle?
He took the horses in trade. I don't know what he did with them.
That's a pretty good story. And you got your first 2-row picker. When do you think that was?
1939 I got the first
1939.
F20 farmall with a 2-row picker on it. And then I went doing we picked our own, and then I went. Yeah. Yeah. So that's how I went over to pick corn for her dad, and she was carrying milk out to the milk, carrying milk, and so I parked that corn picker right next to that milk house when I see them pretty legs coming by. so I thought, geez, a pretty nice gal, and then they invited me to come in and eat, and she invited me, and I was too bashful, and then her sister talked me into it, Catherine, and so I went in, and that was my first experience there, and then a while later I'm in Naperville, and she comes walking down the street there, and I blew the horn at her and told her to come over there, and I said, how about you go skating or something with me? And so she thought that was all right too, so we made a first date.
Just not too long before Pearl Harbor.
So
did you
that's one of the smartest moves I ever made.
You bet.
Were you milking cows at the same time?
Oh yeah, you did that in the morning and at night.
Every dairy farmer knows that. Then we had cows 1 year after we were married. 1 year, because he thought I was going to help him, so I'm done milking cows. So bad.
Well, you know, you think about it, a dairy farmer has got to be there 365 days a year, twice a day, and you don't have any time to yourself. And the more we talked about that, hey, we can't ever go on vacation or doing anything if we're a dairy farm, we decided we don't want that life. So that's why we got rid of the dairy and bought some beef animals. I said, you know, you can get the neighbor to come over and feed them once a day. You don't have to milk them.
This is an old corn crib that probably dates from 1900. And this bin here would hold corn on the cob. And the wagon would pull in the center part here, and you'd have to take a scoop shovel and shovel the corn up over where the doors opened up here on top and throw the corn into the bin.
On our farm, after we picked a load of corn, we'd have to drive it into our old 1850 timber frame corn crib and unload the corn into the bin by shoveling it. And then, about once a month, we'd have to load the corn back into the wagon and pull it up onto the barn floor, because we used corn was a main ingredient for the ground feed that we fed to the cows. So once a month we'd have the corn up on the barn floor, we'd shovel oats out of the oat bin, and we'd put in good quality hay and mineral and bone meal and soybean meal and other ingredients that my father liked to include in the ground feed mix. Then a custom grinder would show up, and the big machine would grind all this together and blow it into the ground feed bin. So all the cows were fed a ration of ground feed twice a day throughout the entire year. So this was just another aspect of the way we used corn. In 1945, our family had just returned to our original family farm on 71st Street. World War II was barely over. We did not fill silos that year and felt we could get through the winter with just shocked corn. I was always fascinated by the knotter unit on the binder, which seldom failed to deliver a tight twine knot around the bundle of corn. The binder carried about a dozen bundles and then dropped them in a pile. We made the shocks by standing the bundles of corn together and running a twine around the top. The bottom of the shocks would splay out as we pulled the twine tight and tied it off. A field of shocked corn took on a very nice aspect. All through the winter we picked the corn shocks up and fed the bundles to our cattle in the frozen pastures. I greatly enjoyed taking the team and bringing in the shocks. Under the shock there were almost always startled field mice. They would scatter across the snow to the other shocks. Farmer Tom Kuhn tells this story.
Used to farm in Naperville a lot, over right where Nike Park is actually. And I'll never forget the one time we were shelling corn. We used to take the corn and then they'd take it right by the ears and put it up into the grain bins. And the coons always used to come. My parents were coons, and they always used to come as a family, and they would shell the corn and pick the corn. And one time, Grandpa Coon, he was up in the corn bin there, and he actually had to put tape around his legs so the mice wouldn't run up him. Well, I'll be darned if a mouse didn't run right up his pant leg, and he was squirming around up, and that was definitely the talk of the stories there at dinner time, how the mouse ran up Grandpa Coon's leg there.
By 1947, our dairy herd was growing and we needed to fill our silos with corn. More work for our good old binder. The corn was still green with the kernels just starting to dent. We had 2 hay racks hauling bundles of corn from the binder in the field to the silo filler blower located by the silo. Bob Lyman, Murray Palmer, and the 3 McPherson brothers came by to be our silo filling crew. The first job was setting up the blower by the silo and staking it down, and then running the belt to the tractor. Very similar to this blower we found at the Sycamore Steam Show. The spinning knife blades cut the entire bundle of corn into tiny pieces and blew the chopped corn up through the 8-inch steel pipe to the top of the silo, instead of into a wagon as shown here. The next day, the silage had settled about 4 or 5 feet. By the end of the day, Murray Palmer, who was at the top of the silo, tramping and leveling the silage, looked over the edge and saw us down below. We were having a watermelon. He shouted down that he wanted some. So I pitched a piece of watermelon into the blower and blew it up to him. The corn soon fermented and turned into silage. And it was always there was always a fragrance of silage in the barn, especially at milking time when we fed the silage to the cows. The pungent smell of silage was a rather unwelcome fragrance if it ever made it into our work clothes and into the house. The last corn of all on our farm was, of course, sweet corn. August sweet corn. One of the great gustatory pleasures of farm life was having our own sweet corn right out of the patch. We always had plenty to give away to friends who would drop by to see if the corn was ready yet. Let's have a look at some sweet corn enthusiasts in the Sycamore Steam Show. Surrounded by a village, our farming operation ended in 1969. The corn and hay fields, along with their pheasants, meadowlarks, red foxes, skunks, and other creatures of the fence rows, melted away into an urban area. No more fields of green corn and clover stretching away over our modest hills. Over the years, however, I've remained interested in farming and continue to admire and be astonished by the rich farm heritage and boundless diversity and inventiveness of our nation's farmers and agricultural businesses. I always greatly enjoy a drive through our cornfields. Since reading The Story of Corn by Betty Fussell, I have a much greater understanding and appreciation for the immense life-sustaining part played by corn in the lives of our Native Americans, as well as all the later colonial and immigrant peoples continuing on into today's world, where corn is raised around the world. Our farm was a very tiny part of this long story of corn. Among many other fascinating stories, Betty Fussell describes the ongoing and vigorous debate among corn scientists as they hunt for and theorize about the origins of corn. Native American Indian peoples may have developed their corn from some original plant in Central America. It is still being debated. Most tribes kept their corn plants from mixing and hybridizing with the corn of other tribes. Trading during the colonial period spread this native corn around the world as one of the most important food and feed grains. Many people had observed that corn would crossbreed. In the late 1800s, corn scientists were hard at work crossbreeding corn varieties. We were farming just as the hybridization of corn was booming in the 1920s and 30s, with corn being translated into hundreds of new products as the chemistry of corn became known. Recent gains in biotechnology using gene modification adds whole new dimensions to corn. This memoir is only a single tiny kernel in the continuing ferment in the farm fields of our country and other global farmland economies. Perhaps the biggest revolution in agriculture and agribusiness is the growing use of gene modification techniques, or GM, for adding fundamental genetic materials to plants that would not happen in the formerly ordinary selection and crossbreeding of plants. The whole field of gene-modified organisms is vast and continues to grow. The old agriculture is being left in the remaining dust of rusty old machinery and descriptive biology. Molecular biology contains great promise, as well as the many unknowns and yet to be discovered hazards, all of which has induced other societal, business, and environmental changes. The corn in our lives has traveled a long, long way from the gardens of our native Indian peoples. When you look at a cornfield today, you are looking at this amazing plant that would be turned into thousands of products and is the subject of thousands of scientific studies. That's corn for now. There's more where this came from. This is the year 2007. 93 million acres of corn have been planted in this country. Think of it. See you later.
It had to be you. It had to be you. I wandered around, finally found somebody who could make me be true, could make me feel blue. I might even be glad, just to be sad, think of you. Some others I knew, I'd never be me, I'd never be cross, try to be lost, they wouldn't do. For nobody else would be that true. You got your faults, but I love you still. Had to be you. It had to be you.
I always loved everything I was doing. I loved farming. I loved doing it.
spring down on the farm. Spring has finally come. The grass is nice and green. It paints a pretty picture that's very often seen. It's the season of the year that's filled with love and charm. There's not a nicer way to spend it than living on a farm. Just to hear the thunder and showers are on the way, you know that you'll be blessed with an extra load of hay. What a thrill to hear the songbirds a-singing all their worth. Or how about a real good whip of newly worked up earth? Soon the planters will be clicking and the engines sing their song. Spring work now is starting and the days will seem quite long. So when the planting season's over and the farmer did his best, please kneel down and say, "Thank you, Lord, don't quit. Help us do the rest." Okay?
That's great, Frank. Thank you.
I think that, you know, this was an inducement to write some more.
Thank you. That was a very nice poem.
Did you
I
like
really
that?
liked it. You bet. And
Well, I tell you, she read it at the Farm Bureau meeting, and a lot of people asked for copies of it. So then she wanted to know if she could print it in the paper, and I said, well, sure, go ahead. If it will help somebody, go to it.
You bet.
Yeah. But you see, I read it to another person, and this person told me if you hadn't been a farmer, you never would have come up with it.
Of course,
I
you wouldn't.
I think it's right, don't
You're
you?
right. You're
Yeah.
right. I used to sing every song I knew when I was out in the tractor cultivating.
Yeah.
You know, I just sing and sing and sing.
Yeah.
And you're making up poems out there.
But you see, you know, years ago when you got off the tractor and shut it off, you know, you thought to yourself, well, that's enough for this. Now, when you hear one, they're humming across the field, singing a song, right? Yeah.
They're humming with their song.
Now, I'll tell you what you do. You take that camera, and I'll show you how I usually end my little programs. Can you do that? Take that thing.
Okay. You want me to take the camera?
Never mind what I'm going to do. Just, you tell me when you're ready. Okay? Right? Okay. Now, as a rule, when I have a little TV program like this, what you call a quickie, I never end it abruptly. I drag it out as long as I can, and this is my ending. Now, you never had a show end like that in your life.
It had to be you. I wandered around, finally found somebody who could make me be true, could make me feel blue. I might even be glad, just a little sad, think of you. Some others I knew I'd never be me, might never be cross, try to be lost, they wouldn't do. For nobody else would be that true. You got your faults, but I love you still. Had to be you. Wonderful you. It had to be you.